The widow's daughter changed his bandages every morning, her gentle hands the only thing keeping infection at bay. But she never saw what he saw, the way her eyes held storms she wouldn't speak of, the bruises on her wrists she thought her sleeves concealed, or the shadow that followed her home each night, a cruel man who called himself her stepfather. By the time the cowboy's wounds had healed, he'd made a silent vow. She had saved his life. Now he would save hers, even if it meant facing down the most dangerous man in Copper Ridge, Montana. But saving her would require something neither expected. Not just courage, but a love powerful enough to heal the deepest wounds of all. Copper Ridge, Montana. Late summer, 1883. The August heat hung thick over the valley, making every breath feel heavy. The small town sat nestled between pine-covered mountains, where creeks ran cold and gossip ran hot. It was the kind of place where everyone knew your business before you did, where a woman alone was either pitied or talked about, and where secrets had a way of festering in the silence. Saman Whitmore knelt in the small vegetable garden behind the widow's cottage, dirt caked under her fingernails, sweat dampening the back of her faded dress. She pulled at a stubborn weed near the tomato plants, her left wrist aching where the bruise throbbed beneath her sleeve. At 23, she should have been married by now, should have had a home of her own, children tugging at her skirts. Instead, she lived under her mother's roof and under her stepfather's rules. She'd learned to keep her head down, her voice quiet, and her sleeves long, even in the summer heat. Saman. Her mother's voice drifted through the open kitchen window, thin and anxious. Saman, come quick. Saman wiped her hands on her apron and hurried inside. The cottage was small and dark, just 3 rooms with low ceilings and windows that stayed half-curtained. Her mother, Martha, stood by the door wringing her hands. She was only 42 but looked 20 years older, her face lined with worry, her brown hair streaked with gray that had come too soon. Behind her stood Wallace Grinstead, filling the doorway with his bulk, his face red from drink even this early in the day. There's a man, Martha said, her voice shaking. On the road. He's hurt bad. Wallace spat tobacco juice into the dirt by the step. Full drifter got himself shot, most like. Probably a thief or worse. He looked at Saman with cold eyes. Not our problem. But Saman had already grabbed her shawl. Where is he? Her mother pointed toward the main road, just past the edge of their property. Saman didn't wait for permission. She lifted her skirts and ran, ignoring Wallace's shout behind her. When she reached the road, she saw him. A man lay crumpled in the dust, his shirt dark with blood, his face pale as death. His hat had fallen a few feet away, and his horse stood nearby, reins dragging, waiting. Saman dropped to her knees beside him. His breathing came shallow and quick. A gunshot wound in his left shoulder, still bleeding. She pressed her hand against it, feeling the warmth of blood seep through her fingers. His eyes fluttered open just for a moment. They were gray, like storm clouds, and even through his pain, they seemed to see straight into her. You're safe now, Saman whispered. I've got you. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Then his eyes closed again. Help me, Saman called back toward the cottage. Her mother came running, breathless. Together, they managed to get the stranger's arm over Saman's shoulder. He was tall and solid, all muscle and bone, but barely conscious. They half carried, half dragged him back to the cottage. Wallace stood in the doorway, arms crossed, blocking their way. You bring that trash into my house, they'll be hell to pay, he said. Martha's voice came out small and pleading. Wallace, please. He'll die out here. Let him. One less saddle tramp in the world. Saman looked up at her stepfather, still holding the wounded man's weight. Something in her shifted. Maybe it was the way the stranger had looked at her, or maybe it was just 3 years of fear finally reaching its breaking point. Her voice came out steady and clear. This is Mama's house. Her name is on the deed, and we're bringing him inside. For a long moment, Wallace stared at her. His hand twitched, and Saman knew that twitch, knew what usually followed it. But with her mother watching and the stranger bleeding out between them, he stepped aside. "On your head, then," he muttered. "But he's gone the minute he can walk. And you'll be the one explaining to the sheriff when they come looking for whatever he done." They laid the stranger on a narrow cot in the corner of the main room, the one Saman's father had built years ago. Martha fetched water and clean rags while Salman carefully cut away the blood-soaked shirt. The wound was bad but clean. The bullet had gone through. That was lucky. If she could stop the infection, he had a chance. "We need the doctor," Martha whispered. Wallace, slouched in his chair by the cold stove, laughed. "Waste good money on a stranger. You've lost your minds, both of you. Do what you can with what you got, or let him go. Makes no difference to me." Saman's hands shook as she cleaned the wound, but she worked carefully the way she remembered her father teaching her when she was small. He'd been a good man, her father, kind and patient. He'd shown her how to tend injured animals, how to stitch and bandage. She'd never imagined she'd use those skills on a man bleeding out on their floor. The stranger drifted in and out. Sometimes his eyes would open, clouded with pain. Once he grabbed her wrist, his grip surprisingly strong. "Don't," he whispered. "Don't let him." "Let who?" Saman asked softly, but he'd already slipped back under. Night fell. Wallace went to the saloon, as he always did. Martha brought broth and bread, then retreated to her room, too afraid to defy Wallace even when he wasn't there. Saman sat beside the cot, changing the bandages, checking for fever. The stranger's breathing evened out. His color improved just slightly. She allowed herself a small hope that maybe, just maybe, he would survive. Around midnight, his eyes opened. This time they were clearer, more focused. He looked around the dim room, then at Salman sitting in the chair beside him. "You," he said, his voice rough. "You saved me." Salman shook her head. "Not yet, but I'm trying." "Why?" He studied her face in the lamplight. "You don't know me. Does that matter?" He was quiet for a moment. Then his eyes traveled to her wrists, where her sleeves had pushed back while she worked. The bruises showed, purple and yellow, finger-shaped. His jaw tightened. When he spoke again, his voice was different. "Harder. Who did that to you?" Saman quickly pulled her sleeves down. "It's nothing. It's not nothing." He tried to sit up, winced, fell back. "Tell me who." "You need to rest." Saman stood, busying herself with the bandages, not meeting his eyes. "Save your strength." But she felt his gaze on her, steady and unwavering. After a long silence, he spoke again. "My name's Alastair Bridger, and I owe you my life." He paused, then added quietly, "I don't forget debts." Saman finally looked at him. Something in his eyes made her breath catch. Not pity, not judgment, just a quiet promise she didn't quite understand yet. "I'm Saman," she said softly. "Saman Whitmore, and you don't owe me anything." But even as she said it, she wondered if that was true, because something had shifted in that dusty road when she'd knelt beside a dying stranger. Something had cracked open inside her, letting in the smallest sliver of light. Outside, the Montana night stretched vast and star-filled. Inside the dark cottage, Saman sat watch over a wounded cowboy, unaware that the man she'd saved would soon save her in return, that his healing hands would teach her heart to hope again, and that love, when it finally came, would be fiercer than any wound and stronger than any fear. The days fell into a quiet rhythm. Each morning, Saman woke before dawn to tend to Alastair's wounds before Wallace stirred. She'd slip into the main room with fresh bandages and warm water, moving as softly as a shadow. Alastair would already be awake, watching the door, listening. He never seemed to sleep deeply, as though some part of him stayed alert even in rest. "Morning," he'd say, his voice low and rough from the night. "Good morning," Saman would whisper back, kneeling beside the cot. Her hands worked gently, unwrapping the old bandages, checking for infection, applying the salve her mother had made from herbs in the garden. Alastair never flinched, even when it must have hurt. He just watched her face while she worked, his gray eyes steady and calm. On the third day, Salman started humming. She didn't realize she was doing it at first. It was an old hymn her father used to sing, something she hadn't thought about in years. Her hands moved in time with the melody, smoothing the bandages, tucking the edges. When she finished, she looked up and found Alastair smiling, just slightly. "That's pretty," he said. "Haven't heard that song in a long time." Saman felt her cheeks warm. "I didn't mean to. It just came out. Don't apologize. It's the first peaceful sound I've heard since I got here." He paused, then added carefully, "Besides your voice." She busied herself with gathering the old bandages, not knowing what to say to that. Nobody had called her voice peaceful before. Wallace called it mousy. Said she whispered like a scared rabbit. But Alastair said it like he meant it. Martha appeared in the doorway, wringing her hands as she always did. "Saman, sweetheart, I'll finish up here. Wallace will be up soon, and you know how he gets if breakfast isn't ready." Saman nodded and rose quickly. But as she turned to go, Alastair's hand caught hers, just for a moment. "Thank you," he said quietly. His thumb brushed over the bruise on her wrist, so gentle she barely felt it. "For everything." Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Something Saman couldn't name, but felt all the way through. Then she pulled away and hurried to the kitchen, her heart beating too fast. The days turned into a week. Alastair grew stronger. He could sit up now without his face going pale. Could eat the broth and bread Martha brought without his hands shaking. Saman spent more time with him, changing his bandages, checking his fever, and slowly, carefully, they began to talk. "Where are you from?" Saman asked one afternoon while Wallace was at the saloon and Martha was hanging laundry. "All over," Alastair said. "Never stayed in one place long. Been working ranches since I was 14. Wyoming, Colorado, Montana. Wherever the work took me." "That sounds lonely." Alastair looked at her for a long moment. "It was, but I got used to it." He shifted against a thin pillow. "What about you?" "Born here." Saman shook her head. "Pennsylvania. My father moved us here when I was 15. He wanted land, open sky. Said a man could breathe out west." Her voice softened. "He loved it here. Built this cottage with his own hands. Then he died 3 years ago. Heart just gave out one morning. I'm sorry. Wallace married my mother 6 months later." Saman's hands stilled on the bandage she was wrapping. "Mama was scared. Alone. She didn't know how she'd keep the house, pay the debts Papa left. Wallace seemed like the answer." She looked down, but he wasn't. Alastair's voice went quiet and hard. "He hits you." It wasn't a question. Saman felt her throat tighten. "It's not your concern." "Yes, it is." Alastair sat up straighter, ignoring the pain it caused. "Saman, look at me." When she did, his eyes were fierce. "I know men like him. I grew up with one. My father, he'd come home drunk and mean, and my mother, she'd make excuses. Said it was the work, the drink, the heat. Said he didn't mean it. But he did mean it. Every time." Saman's hands trembled. "What happened?" "He killed her." Alastair's jaw clenched. "Beat her so bad one night, she never woke up. I was 12. I tried to stop him, but I was too small, too weak. He left town that same night. Never saw him again." He looked at Saman with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I swore that day I'd never be weak again. Never let a man like that hurt someone I cared about." Tears pricked Saman's eyes. "I'm sorry. That's terrible. I'm not telling you for pity. I'm telling you so you understand. I see what he does to you. The way you flinch when he raises his voice. The way you and your mother go quiet when he's in the room. I see it all, Saman, and I remember it." Before Saman could respond, the door slammed open. Wallace stood there, swaying slightly, reeking of whiskey even though it was barely past noon. His eyes narrowed when he saw Saman kneeling beside Alastair's cot. "Well, ain't this cozy?" he sneered. "Playing nurse again?" Saman stood quickly. "I was just checking his bandages." "I bet you were." Wallace moved closer, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. "Getting mighty comfortable with our guest, aren't you? Maybe I should start charging him rent for all this special attention." Alastair's voice cut through the room, calm but edged with steel. I'll work for my keep. Soon as I can stand proper, I'll chop wood, mend fences, whatever needs doing. Wallace turned to him, eyes cold. You'll do nothing but leave, soon as you're able. Already been here too long, filling my stepdaughter's head with notions. What notions? Alastair asked. That she's something she ain't. Wallace grabbed Saman's arm, his fingers digging into the bruise already there. She gasped, and Alastair's entire body went rigid. She's my responsibility now, and I'll handle her as I see fit. Let her go. Alastair's voice was deadly quiet. Wallace laughed. Or what? You're half dead, Cowboy. Don't forget that. But he released Saman's arm with a shove that made her stumble. Get to the kitchen. Make yourself useful. Saman fled, her arm throbbing, tears burning behind her eyes. She heard Wallace mutter something crude, heard the sound of Alastair trying to stand, then a grunt of pain as his wound protested. Then Wallace's heavy footsteps leaving, and finally, silence. That night, long after everyone had gone to bed, Saman crept back to the main room. She couldn't sleep, her mind churning with fear and shame, and something else she couldn't name. Alastair was awake, staring at the ceiling. I'm sorry, Saman whispered, for what happened today. I shouldn't have let you see that. Don't apologize for his cruelty. Alastair turned his head to look at her. How long has he been hurting you? Since he married Mama. At first it was just words. Mean things, cruel things. Then it got worse. Saman wrapped her arms around herself. I wanted to leave, but Mama needs me. He controls everything, the money, the house, even the food we eat. Without him, she'd have nothing. Then we leave together. Alastair pushed himself up slowly, wincing. You, me, and your mother. I've got a friend in Wyoming, runs a ranch. Always needs help. He'd give us all work, a place to stay. Saman stared at him. You barely know us. I know enough. I know you saved my life when you didn't have to. I know you're strong and kind and brave, even if you don't see it yet. He reached for her hand, held it gently. I know what it's like to feel trapped, and I know what happens if you stay. For the first time in 3 years, Saman felt something crack open inside her chest. Hope, tiny and fragile, but real. Wallace would come after us. Let him. Alastair's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. I'm not afraid of men like him anymore. Saman looked down at their joined hands. His was rough and callous from years of hard work, but his touch was gentler than anything she'd known. Why are you doing this? She whispered. Alastair was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Because you saved my life, and because I can't ride away knowing I left you in hell. He paused, then added softer. And because when I look at you, I see someone worth fighting for. Saman's breath caught. Their eyes met in the darkness, and something passed between them. Something deeper than gratitude, stronger than friendship. She squeezed his hand, just once, then pulled away before she could do something foolish like lean in and kiss him. I should go, she whispered, before Mama wakes. Saman. She turned back. Alastair's face was half in shadow, but his eyes caught the moonlight. Think about what I said. We could have a different life. All 3 of us. Saman nodded and slipped back to her room, her heart pounding. For the first time since her father died, she let herself imagine a future that didn't include Wallace's fists and fear. A future where she could breathe. But outside her window, Wallace stood in the yard, smoking a cigarette, watching the cottage with cold, calculating eyes. He'd heard every word. 2 weeks passed. Alastair grew stronger each day. He could stand now without swaying, could walk the length of the room without his shoulder screaming in protest. The wound was healing clean, thanks to Saman's careful tending. He'd started helping around the cottage, insisting on earning his keep despite Wallace's dark looks. Each morning, he'd split wood behind the house, building up his strength. Saman would watch from the kitchen window while she kneaded bread, her hands working the dough while her eyes followed his movements. He was tall and lean, with broad shoulders and calloused hands that handled the axe like it weighed nothing. Sometimes he'd catch her looking and smile, and she'd duck her head, face flushing. Martha noticed. One afternoon while they hung laundry, she touched Saman's arm gently. "He's a good man," that elaced her. Saman kept her eyes on the sheet she was pinning. "Yes, Mama. He looks at you like your father looked at me, like you're the sun and moon all at once." Martha's voice went soft and sad. "I forgot what that looked like." Saman turned to her mother. In the daylight, she could see every line of worry, every gray hair that had come from 3 years of fear. "Mama, if we had a chance to leave, would you take it?" Martha's hands stilled on the laundry. "What are you saying?" "Alastair has a friend in Wyoming. A ranch. He says there's work for all of us. A new start." Saman gripped her mother's hands. "We could leave, Mama. Leave Wallace. Leave this place. Be free." For a moment, hope flickered in Martha's eyes. Then it died, replaced by fear. "Wallace would never let us go. You know that. Then we don't ask permission. Saman, you don't understand. He'd come after us. He'd find us." Martha's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "And when he did, what he'd do, it would be worse than anything before." Saman wanted to argue, but deep down, she knew her mother was right. Wallace wasn't the type to let things go. He'd hunt them down just on principle, just to prove he could. The thought made her stomach turn cold. That evening, everything changed. Wallace came home earlier than usual, his face red with drink and something else. Something meaner. He slammed the door so hard the walls shook. Saman and Martha both froze at the stove. "Got news today," Wallace said, his words slightly slurred. He dropped into his chair and looked at Saman with eyes like chips of ice. "Fellow came by the saloon. Dutch Keller. You remember Dutch." Saman's blood went cold. Dutch Keller was a miner from the camps up north. Big, brutal, with a reputation for violence. He'd lost 3 fingers in a brawl and wore the scars like badges. "I know who he is." "Well, Dutch has been looking for a wife. Says he's got claims that are paying good. Needs a woman to keep house." Wallace smiled, and it was the cruelest thing Saman had ever seen. "Owes me money, too. Considerable amount. We made a deal. He marries you, debt's settled." The room spun. Saman grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. "No, wasn't asking your opinion, girl. It's done. He'll be here Sunday to meet you proper. Wedding's set for 2 weeks after." Martha gasped. "Wallace, you can't. She's my daughter, and you're my wife, which makes her mine to handle as I see fit." Wallace stood, swaying slightly. "Be grateful I found someone willing to take her. Plain thing like her, with no dowry and a smart mouth. Dutch is doing us a favor." From the corner of the room, Alastair's voice cut through like a blade. "She's not property to be traded." Wallace turned slowly. "You still here, Drifter? Thought you'd have sense enough to move on by now." Alastair stepped forward, his movements careful but deliberate. "I'll be leaving soon enough. But not alone." The words hung in the air like gun smoke. Wallace's eyes narrowed. "That's so. Saman and Martha are coming with me. To Wyoming. There's work there, a decent life. Something you wouldn't understand." Wallace laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think I'm stupid? Think I didn't hear you two whispering in the dark like love-struck fools?" He moved toward Alastair, fists clenched. "Nobody takes what's mine. Not you, not anyone. They're not yours." Alastair stood his ground. "And if you put your hands on Saman again, you'll answer to me." It happened fast. Wallace swung, his fist aimed at Alastair's face. But Alastair was ready. He blocked the punch and shoved Wallace back hard. Wallace stumbled, crashed into the table, sending dishes flying. He came up with a roar, grabbing the fire poker from beside the stove. "Alastair, no!" Saman screamed. But Wallace was already swinging. The iron poker caught Alastair across his wounded shoulder. He grunted in pain, but didn't go down. Instead, he grabbed Wallace's wrist, twisting until the poker clattered to the floor. They grappled, crashing into chairs, both breathing hard. Martha was screaming. Saman ran forward, tried to pull them apart. "Stop it! Stop!" That's when Wallace's elbow caught her across the face. She went down hard, tasting blood. The room erupted. Alaister's rage broke free. He threw Wallace against the wall, and the whole cottage shook. Wallace slid down, dazed. Then the door burst open. Neighbors, drawn by the screaming, flooded in. Mr. Henderson from next door, Mrs. Walsh from across the road, and behind them, Sheriff Denton, his badge glinting in the lamplight. "What in blazes is going on here?" the sheriff demanded. Wallace was on his feet in an instant, pointing at Alaister. "That man attacked me. In my own home. He's been trying to steal my stepdaughter, filling her head with lies. I want him arrested." "That's not true." Someone struggled to her feet, her lip bleeding. "Wallace hit me. Alaister was defending me." But the sheriff was already looking at Alaister with suspicion. "You're that stranger they brought and shot a few weeks back, ain't you? What's your business here?" "Recovering," Alaister said carefully, "and leaving, soon as arrangements are made." Wallace sneered. "Leaving with my women and whatever he can steal, more like. He's a drifter, Sheriff. Probably the one who shot him in the first place. Some deal gone bad." "That's a lie," someone said desperately. "Sheriff, please, you have to listen." But Sheriff Denton and Wallace were friends. Everyone knew it. They drank together, played cards together. The sheriff put his hand on his gun. "I think you better come with me, son. Let's sort this out at the jail." "No." Someone grabbed Alaister's arm. "He didn't do anything wrong." Alaister looked down at her, and his eyes were full of regret and something deeper. Something that made her heart break. "It's all right," he said softly. He touched her cheek, gentle despite everything. "I'll be all right." "Alaister, please." But the sheriff was already pulling him toward the door. Alaister didn't resist, didn't fight. He just looked back at someone one more time, his gray eyes holding hers. "Remember what I told you," he said. "You're stronger than you know." Then he was gone. The neighbors filtered out, whispering among themselves. Mrs. Walsh gave someone a pitying look, but said nothing. No one ever said anything. That was the way of small towns. Everyone saw everything, but speaking up was another matter entirely. Wallace slammed the door behind them. He turned to Saman and Martha, his face twisted with rage and satisfaction. "Let that be a lesson. You try to leave, you try to define me, and this is what happens." He grabbed Saman's chin, forcing her to look at him. "That cowboy's going to hang for assault, and you're going to marry Dutch Keller in 2 weeks. That's final." He released her with a shove and stormed out, heading back to the saloon to celebrate his victory. Saman stood in the wreckage of their home, dishes broken, chairs overturned, blood on her lip. Martha was crying softly in the corner. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky red and gold. Beautiful and terrible all at once. Saman touched her cheek where Alaister had touched it. She could still feel the warmth of his hand, the gentleness in his eyes. He'd fought for her, been arrested for her, and now he was in a cell, facing charges that could get him hanged. She walked to the window and looked out at the jailhouse across the town square. A single lamp burned in the window. Alaister was in there alone because of her. Something hardened inside Salman's chest, something that had been soft and scared for 3 years. She thought of her father building this house with his own hands. She thought of Alaister standing up to Wallace when no one else ever had. She thought of her mother, crying quietly in the corner, trapped in a nightmare with no end. No more. Saman straightened her spine. She wiped the blood from her lip. And for the first time in 3 years, she made a decision that was entirely her own. Tomorrow, she would fight back. Tomorrow, she would save the man who tried to save her. Tomorrow, she would find her voice and make this town listen. But tonight, she let herself cry. For Alaister, for her mother, for the girl she used to be before fear taught her to be small. Outside, the stars came out one by one, cold and distant and beautiful. And in the jail across the square, a wounded cowboy sat in the darkness, thinking of a woman with gentle hands and a strength she'd forgotten she had. Morning came cold and gray. Saman woke with her jaw set and her mind clear. She dressed carefully, choosing her best dress, the blue one her father had bought her before he died. She braided her hair tight and pinned it up. When she looked in the small mirror, she barely recognized herself. Her eyes looked different, harder, determined. Wallace was still asleep, snoring off his drunk from the night before. Martha sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of cold coffee, her eyes red from crying. "Mama," Simone said quietly, "I'm going to fix this." Martha looked up, fear crossing her face. "Simone, please. Don't make it worse. Alastair will have a trial. Maybe the judge will see reason. The judge is Wallace's cousin. You know that." Simone knelt beside her mother, taking her hands. "I can't sit here and do nothing. Alastair fought for me. Now I fight for him. Ow! What can you possibly do?" Simone stood, squaring her shoulders. "Tell the truth. Loud enough that people have to listen." She walked out before her mother could stop her. The morning air bit at her cheeks as she crossed the square toward the sheriff's office. A few early risers stared as she passed. Let them stare. She was done hiding. Sheriff Denon sat behind his desk, boots up, reading yesterday's newspaper. He barely glanced at Simone when she entered. "If you hear about that drifter, save your breath. He assaulted Wallace in his own home. Witnesses saw it. Witnesses saw Wallace hit me," Simone said, her voice steady. "They saw Alastair defend me. That's not assault. That's protection." The sheriff snorted. "That your story? It's the truth. And I want to see him. No visitors. Wallace's orders." Simone's hands clenched at her sides. "Wallace doesn't own this jail. I'm a witness. I have a right to speak to the accused." For the first time, the sheriff looked uncertain. Simone pressed forward. "If you deny me, I'll tell the whole town you're keeping witnesses from the prisoner. I'll tell them you're taking orders from Wallace instead of following the law. How's that going to look?" The sheriff's face reddened. 5 minutes. That's all you get." Simone didn't wait for him to change his mind. She followed him to the back where 3 cells sat empty except for one. Alastair sat on a narrow cot, his shoulder bandaged fresh. He'd been bleeding again. When he saw Simone, he stood quickly. "Simone, you shouldn't be here. I had to see you." She gripped the bars between them. "Alastair, I'm so sorry. This is all my fault." "No." He moved closer, his hands covering hers through the bars. "None of this is your fault. Wallace did this, not you. The sheriff says there'll be a trial, but the judge is Wallace's cousin. Everyone in this town is afraid of him." Her voice broke slightly. "I don't know how to fight this." Alastair squeezed her hands. "You fight by telling the truth, by standing up. That's all anyone can do. What if the truth isn't enough? Then we try again, and again, until it is." His gray eyes held hers, intense and unwavering. "Simone, listen to me. Win or lose, you've already done something incredible. You stood up to him. You're here, fighting. That takes more courage than anything I've ever done." Tears stung her eyes. "I can't lose you. Not when I just found you." Alastair's voice went soft. "You won't lose me. I promise. One way or another, we're getting out of this." The sheriff called time. Simone didn't want to let go, but Alastair gently released her hands. "Go," he said. "Do what you do best. Be brave. Be true. Make them listen." Simone left the jail with her heart pounding, but her resolve stronger than ever. She walked straight to the church. Reverend Patterson was sweeping the steps. He looked surprised to see her. "Miss Whitmore, what brings you here so early?" "I need to speak to you, Reverend, and I need you to call a town meeting." His eyebrows rose. "A town meeting? About what?" Simone took a deep breath. "About the truth. About Wallace Grinstead. And about what this town has been pretending not to see for 3 years." The Reverend studied her face for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Come inside. Tell me everything." And Simone did. She told him about the beatings, the control, the fear. She told him about Alastair, about how he defended her, about Wallace's lies. She spoke until her voice went hoarse, until every secret she'd kept for 3 years spilled out like poison from a wound. When she finished, the Reverend was quiet. Then he said, "I should have asked sooner. We all should have. I'm sorry, child. I don't need apologies. I need help. You'll have it. He stood. I'll call a meeting for tonight. And someone, be ready to speak. In front of everyone. That evening, the church filled to capacity. Everyone came, drawn by curiosity and gossip. Wallace sat in the front row, smug and confident. The sheriff stood near the door. And in the back, someone waited with her mother beside her, both of them trembling but standing tall. Reverend Patterson stood at the pulpit and raised his hands for silence. The murmuring crowd quieted. We're gathered tonight because one of our own has asked to speak. Saman Whitmore has something to say, and I believe we owe her the courtesy of listening. Wallace shot to his feet. This is nonsense. My stepdaughter has no business addressing the town. Sit down, Wallace, the Reverend said firmly. Everyone has a right to speak in God's house. Saman stood on shaking legs. Martha squeezed her hand once, then released it. Saman walked down the aisle, feeling every eye on her. When she reached the front, she turned to face them all. Her hands trembled, but her voice, when it came, was clear. My name is Saman Whitmore. Most of you knew my father, Thomas Whitmore. He was a good man, an honest man. When he died 3 years ago, he left my mother and me alone. We were scared. We didn't know how we'd survive. She paused, swallowing hard. Wallace Grinstead offered to help. He married my mother. And from that day forward, our lives became a nightmare. A ripple went through the crowd. Wallace started to stand, but the Reverend motioned him down. Saman continued, her voice growing stronger. He hits me. He hits my mother. He controls every cent, every decision, every breath we take. I've hidden the bruises for 3 years because I was ashamed, because I thought no one would believe me, because this town has always looked the other way. Mrs. Walsh, the neighbor, shifted uncomfortably in her pew. Others looked down at their hands. A few weeks ago, a stranger came to our door, a Leicester Bridger. He was shot and dying. Wallace wanted to leave him on the road, but my mother and I brought him in. I tended his wounds. And when he was strong enough to see what was happening in our house, he stood up to Wallace. He defended me. Saman's voice cracked slightly. And for that, he sits in jail right now, charged with assault. But the only crime a Leicester Bridger committed was showing me that I didn't have to live in fear anymore. She looked directly at Wallace. You've controlled me with fear, but I'm not afraid anymore. And I won't let you destroy an innocent man to keep your secrets. The church was dead silent. Then, slowly, Martha stood. Her voice was thin but steady. Everything my daughter says is true. I've watched Wallace hurt her for 3 years. I've worn my own bruises and told myself it was the price of survival. But no more. I won't be silent anymore. Another woman stood. Mrs. Henderson from down the road. Wallace threatened my husband last year. Said he'd burn our barn if we didn't sell him our land cheap. We sold. We were too scared not to. One by one, others stood. The blacksmith, the seamstress, even old Mr. Cooper, who ran the general store. Each one had a story. Each one had been bullied, threatened, or cheated by Wallace Grinstead. Wallace's face went purple with rage. Lies. All of it. You're turning on me because of some drifter and a mouthy girl. No, Saman said quietly. They're turning on you because you've hurt this town long enough. Sheriff Denon stepped forward, looking uncomfortable. Now hold on. Even if all this is true, it doesn't change what happened. That man assaulted Wallace. Did he? Dr. Matthews stood from his seat. He'd been silent until now. I treated a Leicester Bridger's gunshot wound 3 weeks ago. The wound was clean, through and through, consistent with being shot at a distance. Not close range. Not some criminal activity gone wrong. I also treated Saman's split lip and bruised ribs last year after she fell down the stairs. At least, that's what Wallace told me to write down. The doctor looked at Wallace with disgust. I've been a coward. I've looked the other way, but I won't lie anymore. A Leicester Bridger defended an innocent woman from a violent man. That's not assault. That's heroism. The crowd erupted in conversation. Wallace lunged toward Saman, but 3 men blocked his path. The sheriff, looking pale, put his hand on Wallace's shoulder. I think you better come with me, Wallace. We need to sort this out proper. Get your hands off me. Wallace shoved the sheriff back, eyes wild. You're all fools. That girl is mine. That house is mine. The house was my father's, Saman said, her voice ringing clear. And the deed is in my mother's name. You have no claim to us. Not anymore. The sheriff and two other men grabbed Wallace. He fought, cursing and spitting, but they dragged him toward the door. As he passed Saman, he snarled, "This isn't over." Saman looked him in the eye. "Yes, it is." They took him out. The church remained silent for a long moment. Then Reverend Patterson spoke. "I think we owe Saman an apology. All of us. We saw the signs and did nothing." "We don't need apologies," Saman said softly. "We just need a Leicester Bridger released. Tonight." The sheriff, looking ashamed, nodded. "I'll see to it personally." An hour later, Saman stood outside the jail as the door opened. A Leicester stepped out, free. When he saw her, his face transformed. He crossed the distance in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms. Saman buried her face in his chest and finally let herself cry, not from fear or pain, but from relief. "You did it," a Leicester whispered into her hair. "You saved yourself. You saved us both." Saman pulled back to look at him. "We save each other." A Leicester cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "Saman Whitmore, I've traveled this whole country looking for something I couldn't name. And then I found you. Brave, beautiful, strong you. I'm not any of those things," she whispered. "You're all of them, and more." He took a shaky breath. "I love you. I think I've loved you since you knelt in that dusty road and refused to let me die." Saman's heart felt too big for her chest. "I love you too. So much it scares me. Don't be scared. Not anymore." And then he kissed her, soft and gentle and full of promise, right there in the street under the Montana stars. 3 weeks passed like a dream. Wallace sat in jail awaiting trial for assault and extortion. The town that had once feared him now spoke openly about his crimes. Saman and Martha reclaimed their lives, one small piece at a time. The cottage felt different now, lighter. The curtains stayed open, letting sunshine pour through the windows. Laughter returned to rooms that had known only silence and fear. A Leicester stayed, helping repair what Wallace had broken. He fixed the sagging porch, mended the fence, and replanted the garden that had been neglected. But mostly, he stayed close to Saman, as though afraid she might disappear if he looked away too long. One evening, as autumn painted the mountains gold and red, a Leicester took Saman's hand and led her down to the creek beyond town. The water ran clear and cold, reflecting the sunset. They sat on the bank, shoulders touching, watching the sky change colors. "I got a letter from my friend in Wyoming," a Leicester said quietly. "The job's still there. Good land, honest work. He says there's a small house on the property. Nothing fancy, but it's sturdy. Private." Saman's heart skipped. "You're still planning to go?" "I am." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "But not without you. Saman Whitmore, I'm not a rich man. I've got a horse, some savings, and these 2 hands. But what I do have, I give to you freely. My protection, my devotion, my whole heart." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold ring. It was worn smooth with age, but it caught the fading light beautifully. "This was my mother's, the only thing I have left of her. She wore it every day of her life, even when times were hard. She told me once that real love isn't found in easy days. It's forged in hard ones, in standing together when the world tries to break you apart." His voice grew thick with emotion. "You and I, we've seen the hard days. We've stood together, and I want to keep standing with you every day for the rest of my life." Tears streamed down Saman's face. "A Leicester, marry me, Saman. Come to Wyoming with me. Let me spend my life proving that you deserve every good thing this world has to offer." Saman couldn't speak. She could only nod, over and over, until a Leicester laughed and slipped the ring on her finger. It fit perfectly. He pulled her close, and kissed her as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The wedding took place 2 weeks later in the same church where Salman had found her voice. The whole town came to celebrate. Salman wore a simple white dress that Martha had sewn with trembling, joyful hands. Wildflowers crowned her auburn hair. When she walked down the aisle and saw a Leicester waiting at the altar, his eyes shining with love, her heart felt so full she thought it might burst. Reverend Patterson performed the ceremony with a smile on his weathered face. "Do you, a Leicester Bridger, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," a Leicester said, his voice strong and sure. "And do you, Salman Whitmore, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Salman looked at a Leicester, at the man who had shown her what real strength looked like. The man who had fought for her, believed in her, loved her when she'd forgotten how to love herself. "I do. Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." A Leicester cupped Salman's face tenderly and kissed her as the church erupted in applause. When they pulled apart, both were crying and laughing at once. The next morning, a wagon packed with their belongings waited outside the cottage. Martha stood on the porch, beaming despite her tears. "You write to me every week," she said, hugging Salman tight. "I will, Mama. I promise." Salman pulled back. "Are you sure you'll be all right?" "More than all right. Mrs. Walsh and I are opening a boarding house together. I'll finally be my own woman." Martha touched Salman's cheek. "You gave me courage, sweetheart. By finding yours, you showed me I could find mine too." A Leicester helped Salman onto the wagon seat, then climbed up beside her. He took the reins in one hand and Salman's hand in the other. As they rolled away from Copper Ridge, Salman looked back one last time. She saw her mother waving, the church steeple rising against the blue sky, the mountains standing eternal and strong. Then she turned forward toward the road ahead, toward Wyoming, toward the future. "Ready?" a Leicester asked softly. Salman squeezed his hand and smiled. "I'm ready for anything, as long as you're beside me." The wagon rolled on, carrying them toward new horizons. Behind them lay pain and fear and darkness. Ahead lay possibility, hope, and love. Salman Whitmore Bridger had healed a dying cowboy's wounds with her gentle hands. And in return, he had healed her broken heart with a love that would last forever. If this story of courage, healing, and true love touched your heart, don't forget to hit that like button. Salman's bravery in facing her abuser and a Leicester's unwavering devotion remind us that real strength comes from standing up for what's right, even when we're afraid. Subscribe to Western Frontier Tales for more emotional, inspiring tales from the frontier. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done in Salman's place? Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.